Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Hey, Caroline. How's it going today?
Oh, you know, Bryce, it's going.
It is, yes. It's funny because we're having some technical difficulties here as we tried to start recording today. We're actually supposed to have two guests joining us. We're just going to go with one, but Christy Travis, she was supposed to be joining us, community librarian, and it just, technical difficulties sometimes, but we will have Christy back on the show again at some point.
It gave us a chance to reminisce, the two of us, Bryce, about all of the other technical issues we've had. Like, remember when we were trying to do this? Or remember when we couldn't get the guest on the phone?
Yeah, if we were a sitcom, it totally would have been like this weird flashback episode.
It absolutely would have been. We've talked about doing an Overdue Finds clip show, but that wasn't what I thought we meant.
No.
But I like that idea.
It would have worked out perfectly for it. But in addition to, occasionally some technical difficulties we'll run into here on the production, one thing that we totally love doing on the podcast, Caroline, and that is reminiscing and looking back at pop culture anniversaries. Like, we love our pop culture anniversaries here on the show, don't we?
We do, and I was really happy to bring this one to our last brainstorming meeting when I was looking around, and it's like, okay, 2023, a lot of things are having an anniversary this year, but who's having a milestone anniversary? And I threw this out there, and I didn't know how it was going to be received, but I am so excited to be here today for this recording.
Yeah, of course, as you could see, if you downloaded the episode or pressed play, today we are talking all about Garfield. 2023 actually marks the 45th anniversary of the very first Garfield comic strip, which is insane. It's older than all of us here on the show today. It's just always been there. So and it's funny too, because we talked about this on our previous episode about how what we'll do is we'll send a note out to staff and we'll be like, hey, these are the episodes that we've got coming up. And, we of course listed Star Wars, and I'll give everybody a little sneak peek. We will be having an episode on Jurassic Park. One of the other ones we mentioned was Garfield, and it's funny because, like, when you mentioned the idea, Caroline, I was like, that sounds fun, but to me, I was just like, oh, we're probably not going to get, like, nobody's going to be interested in doing this episode with us. Like, this will be a fun one for us, and people will enjoy it who are fans, but I kind of thought, like, Steph might be a little too cool to be talking about Garfield, but that was far from the case.
It was by far the most interest we got from staff again on doing it. So, which was kind of fun. And I think that it really speaks to where Garfield is in 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of those staff members who was like, sign me up, please. So they actually work with you, Caroline, at our Capilano branch, and they're a library assistant. Welcome back to the show, Josh Carr. Josh, you were last on our Best Cover Songs episode of Overdue Finds, and before that, you were on another music episode. So, is it like your key interests are like music and Garfield? Is that kind of your wheelhouse there?
You would think so based on my podcast episodes, but I love exploring all sorts of new things out there. So, while it's been music and Garfield here, I also love reading and video games, and that's kind of why I became a library assistant, because I just love everything, learning everything.
That's awesome. No.
I know Josh is waiting for us. They're ready as soon as we say we're going to do a manga episode.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You're in.
I'm in.
I think that's actually on our list at some point, but I think really the only thing holding us back is like, well, I know for a fact my lack of knowledge on the subject, and Caroline, I'm guessing probably yours as well.
Yeah, so I think, we'll need to have some people who know what they're talking about, and I think that's Josh. So
But we're going to have so much fun today. I'm excited to be talking about Garfield. Like, when we started this podcast, like, if you would have told me, hey, like 4 years in, you're going to be doing an episode on Garfield, I'd be super excited. And I don't think I'd believe you, maybe. I'd be like, really? Did we run out of ideas already in that time? But it just makes so much sense. And we're going to get into why it makes sense that we are talking about Garfield. But before we do, before we actually get into our overdue finds, Caroline, I've got a big event announcement I want to let listeners know about. And tickets are now available for our next Forward Thinking Speaker Series event. So you won't want to miss Jan Arden, My Story, presented by Edmonton Community Foundation on June 20th at the Northern Alberta Jubilee Auditorium. So during this speaking event, Jan Arden will share her personal journey, exploring the importance of adaptability and being built for change, and how to find the good and the funny in all situations, even the most challenging of times. So you can secure your tickets today by visiting ticketmaster.ca or visit our website at epl.ca/speaker series.
You mentioned June 20th is the day for that.
Yes.
Right,
June,
Bryce?
yes, June 20th. And a little peek behind the scenes. Josh, you may have secured your tickets already?
I sure did. This will be coming after Mother's Day, so I got it as a Mother's Day gift for my mother.
Nice.
She's going to be really happy.
That's awesome. All right, so let's get into our Overdue Finds picks. Josh, it's been a while since you've been on the show. What have you been enjoying lately?
Well, in keeping with my trend of not talking about anything related to the episode, I actually sat down and watched some movies last weekend. I'm not a movie watcher, but this year I've watched 3 movies, and last week I found my new favorite movie. It's called Only Yesterday. It's done by Studio Ghibli. It is about a older woman reminiscing about her 5th grade experiences during a summer where she, as a grown woman, goes and takes her work vacation to help out in the fields. And it goes back and forth between where she's working now and the experiences there, and as well as her 5th grade and what made her to the person she is today. It's a very beautiful film. Highly recommend it. Made me cry, which is very hard to do with films in general. So absolutely recommend it.
Nice. So Studio Ghibli, though, like for those who aren't aware, we're the same studio who put out some great anime. So like stuff like Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro, right?
Yep, they done that. The other one I watched that weekend was also by the same studio, and it was Whisper of the Heart, which is now my 2nd favorite movie. So, and before that, my all-time favorite movie was also by them, so I'm kind of in love with them, From Up on Poppy Hill. If you ask me about it, I will have a whole episode dedicated to From Up on Poppy Hill. I love it so much. So, those are my 3 favorite movies, and I recommend you check them all out at the library.
Nice. So they're all available on DVD and...
They're all available on DVD,
Perfect.
Blu-ray, so you stop by, put them on hold. I'm more than happy to do that for you.
Caroline, how about you?
Well, as we referenced sitcoms earlier, and this week I finished up Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, Matthew Perry's memoir that came out the end of last year, I think, that talks about his life living with his addictions and the experience of being on Friends and being a working actor and his relationship with his parents and his family. It's really interesting story. His mom was a press secretary for Pierre Trudeau in his government. He describes her as basically CJ from the West Wing, but for Trudeau, the first Trudeau. His father, John Bennett Perry, was also an actor, most famously the Old Spice man from the Old Spice commercials. His mom, years later, married Keith Morrison from Dateline. So, there's, growing up and the experience of being shipped from one parent to another and then finally going off on his own. And I think his story, his early acting, and he describes like having guest spots on all these different shows, and then he gets Friends, and it's going to be his big break, and it is, and it's huge and otherworldly, and then his life just kind of falls apart. And through the 90s, he's battling a number of addictions to a number of different things, and in and out of rehabs, and just his overall experience, the way he talks about it and writes it. There are times when it's incredibly self-aware, and then times where it's like, I don't know that you think you're saying what you're saying in there. And it's just a really interesting look at someone who has gone through things that have just shaped his life in such a way that he can only now start to process some of this stuff. So yeah, if you're a fan of Matthew Perry and Friends or TV, or looking for a memoir about addiction and substance abuse, I recommend checking out Friends, Lovers, and The Big Terrible Thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember when that book came out last year, and there was some controversy with it because I think he kind of takes a shot at Keanu Reeves or something.
Out of nowhere. Yeah. I remember this, and I remembered it, and I thought, okay, well, it's probably out of a context of... No, there is no context. It's basically, why did River Phoenix die and Keanu Reeves is still alive? And you're like, what? Yeah. What did I? No. Yeah. No. And I that's, like I said, some pieces you can tell he's become very aware of himself, and then other areas it's like that might need some more examination.
Yeah, I thought I actually read recently that I think in future editions that are being printed, I think he's taking out that Keanu Reeves line, but it sounds like a fascinating book, and it's interesting because actually just the other night I think it was on Facebook or something, on this One History account that I follow, but there was a picture of the cast of Friends. They were flying to Vegas, and it was the night before it was set to debut, and whatever the producers or show's creator or whatever was kind of enjoy this because, after this, you're going to be one of the most recognizable, you're going to be some of the most recognizable people on the planet.
Yeah, he writes about that in the book, and it was James Burrows who directed the pilot of Friends, who kind of set them off and sent them out, and I think even gave them some money to spend at the casinos. But on that, it's just so interesting. And the Friends reunion that aired a couple of years ago now, I found it very interesting for people who look at not only just Friends as the TV show, but also fame and what culture more broadly. And then they were showing these set videos or footage taken on the set between takes when they were just filming the first season, and they're so young and have no idea what's coming. And so there's this kind of watching it is just such an interesting experience. I was not prepared to feel as many things as I felt over the Friends reunion. And so, now with Matthew Perry's book, one of my things I was happy about, all the rest of the cast comes off very, very well. He speaks highly of them, pointing to David Schwimmer's suggestion that they all negotiate together so that they didn't have any infighting among the cast. Lisa Kudrow writes the foreword to the book, and he speaks highly of the cast. So that's nice. I like when people get along.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like it's obviously a must read for anybody who's a fan of Friends.
Bryce, what have you been enjoying?
During our last episode, our Star Wars episode, at the end of each episode, we promote our show notes. So I actually did up the show notes for our last episode.
Really?
Yeah.
I could have done those.
Oh, that's okay.
I need to do those.
I did it. You were busy. I took care of them. I don't do them very often. But if you go back to the Star Wars episode, you look in the show notes, that's got my fingerprints all over it. And if you look in the show notes, one of the books that we didn't actually talk about it on the episode, but I kind of just, when I was looking at Star Wars titles, this came up, so I included it. And so I actually ended up borrowing the book, and it's such a fun read. And my pick this week is Star Wars, The Ultimate Action Figure Collection. So Caroline, I actually also have an idea for a future episode. We need to do an episode on coffee table books, because this is a great coffee table book. If you were a fan of Star Wars when you were a kid, and a lot of people were, you're going to love this one. So the book itself features images of every single Star Wars action figure that's been released since 1978. So that was when the very first Star Wars toy line came out. So there'll be I don't know, 2 or 3 pages of just Darth Vader figures or Luke Skywalker figures, and also just kind of random one-off characters that maybe only got one action figure. So it's a fun way to kind of look back at all these figures that maybe you had as a kid, or just kind of want to reminisce about maybe some of those figures that maybe you wished maybe you had. So is the only Star Wars toys that I actually had as a kid were kind of from the original line, kind of around the Return of the Jedi. So they came out in 1984. So it was really cool going back through there, and I was like, oh, I had that Chewbacca, and I had that Yoda figure. So for me, it was really cool to walk down memory lane with this book. My only complaint about the book is that I wish it had the vehicles and other maybe toy accessories and some of the other merchandise that came out. So the book is huge, and it's just the actual figures. But as somebody who's even as an adult, I love having kind of these old pop culture figures in my collection. It was really cool to go back and look at that. So it's a nice coffee table book, and you can borrow it from us.
We absolutely should do a show on coffee table books, Bryce, and that I'll explain to you then why I probably will never own any.
Oh,
so now I'm just going to put that out there.
Well, now we need to do one. So if you would like us to do an episode on coffee table books, email us at podcast@epl.ca. And like Caroline, you want to hear her story about why she'll never own any coffee table books. I actually have quite a few myself. So it's they look nice sitting on a bookshelf, really. All right, so let's talk all about Garfield. Before we get into Garfield, though, Caroline, you've got some fun facts for us, so I'm really interested to hear these.
Yeah, I'm bringing back the fun facts.
Yeah,
it's been a while. It's been a while since we've done them, but I thought, people might need a primer for Garfield because it's so much more than I originally thought. So, originally published by Jim Davis in the Pendleton, Indiana newspaper as John in 1976, 2 years before it made its nationwide syndication debut on June 19th, 1978 as Garfield. So it was originally titled Dawn. Garfield, as from what I can tell, has always been the central character. Chronicles the life of Garfield, his human owner John Arbuckle, and Odie, the dog, who as far as I know has never had his name in the title of the comic strip. Garfield, the character, was born in the kitchen of Mama Leone's Italian restaurant, where he developed a taste for Italian food, particularly lasagna. He ate so much of it that the restaurant needed to give him away or they would go out of business. And that is how he ended up with John and Odie in his current living situation. The first Garfield anthology, Garfield at Large, was published in 1980, and the book layout, which is the one that that when you think of a Garfield book, long, kind of thinner, shorter than a regular size book, preserved the ability to see the strip as it was originally presented. Previously, comic anthologies had reordered the squares to fit in a standard page. This popularized this format, which is now known as the Garfield format, and used by other comic strips as well. 1984 was a turning point for the comic. It made a more cartoonish look to it. Garfield, in the early years, regularly would sit much like a cat would sit. Starting in 1984, he started walking on two legs, slimmed down, and stopped looking through heavily squinted eyes. His eyes became much bigger and open wide. Jim Davis explained that the move to two legs made it easier to kick Odie off the table. In 1987, Garfield Stuck on You was released. This is the plush Garfield toy that you would put in the window of a car. Jim Davis had originally wanted the plush toys to have Velcro on their paws so that people could attach them to curtains in their house. And then you would have like a cat climbing up the curtains in your house. Instead, the factory attached suction cups, which seems like a big mistake to me.
Pretty big.
Like, that's not a little thing.
No.
But they pivoted and marketed it as something to put in your car window. Sales hit $50 million of Garfield Stuck on You before consumers moved on to another fad. 12 Garfield TV specials aired between 1982 and 1991, including my favorite, A Garfield Christmas.
Oh, yeah. Great.
All of these specials featured Lorenzo Music as the voice of Garfield. Lorenzo Music co-created the Bob Newhart Show sitcom and wrote for The Mary Tyler Moore Show and Rhoda. He also appeared, in quotes, as the unseen role of Carlton the doorman on Rhoda, and won an Emmy for the animated special Carlton Your Doorman, which was a pilot for a series that ended up not getting picked up. That you can watch it on YouTube. It is an animated show starring humans with a laugh track. It's unsettling, kind of. He was also the voice of Larry the Crash Test Dummy in a series of seatbelt and airbag PSAs for the U.S. National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration, as well as ads for Florida citrus growers through the 80s and 90s. The TV show ran for 7 seasons, Garfield and Friends on Saturday mornings. The first Garfield movie was Garfield the Movie in 2004. Garfield, now voiced by Bill Murray. It had a theatrical sequel, Garfield, A Tale of Two Kitties. 3 direct-to-video movies have been released after that, with Frank Welker, a very prolific voice actor voicing Garfield. A new movie is scheduled for next year with... Recently, he voiced Mario. Now moving on to Garfield, Chris Pratt.
And I'm sure the internet will love that, by the way. As soon as the first clip is released, I'm sure everybody will have nothing but positive comments about it.
Today, the daily comic strip is syndicated in more than 2,400 newspapers with an estimated readership of over 200 million. And it's held the Guinness World Record for being the world's most widely syndicated comic strip. Garfield has also been featured in video games, novelizations, and a restaurant, briefly, that included pizzas in the shape of Garfield.
Interesting. I don't know how you cut that then. Weird.
Well, I don't think it was 3D. I think it was just like his face.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense then. Yeah, I wasn't thinking 3D, but just the body of him laying down.
Right. Yeah. No, I was thinking like maybe like 3D, like a cake, but it's pizza.
Yeah.
I
that
mean,
would be kind of cool.
I don't think it's that, but if somebody wants to run with that idea, please do.
The outline of the face just makes way more sense for pizza.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
I was just going to quickly mention too. Sorry, I don't want to turn this into a whole episode on Lorenzo music. Nothing against Mr. Lorenzo music, but weird connection. Obviously, Bill Murray voiced Garfield in the movie, but Lorenzo music voiced Peter Venkman in the Ghostbusters cartoon. Bill Murray was Peter Venkman in the Ghostbusters movie.
We honestly could. I was saying like a mini series on Lorenzo music. He appears to be fascinating.
Yeah.
Like what a career. You create the Bob Newhart show. You write for Mary Tyler Moore. You have this recurring Rhoda thing that I think released, like they remixed his voice into a hit song, like, wow. and then bam, Garfield. So.
So, Josh, getting back to Garfield, what's your history? Like, I assume you kind of grew up reading it. Do you remember, like, your first impressions of Garfield?
Oh, man. Going way back in time, I think it was like my first experience reading, actually. It was reading Garfield comics. One of the first gifts I remember was I got the big, like, short, long Garfield books for Christmas, and then I started getting more and more. Like I had the first one that came out, and I think it was like 1997 or something by that point. Like I had so many of them. So like I remember when Garfield was just a cat, and then watching the transformation turning from him to going onto two legs. And then I think that obsession kind of died out with the movie, which was an excellent piece of cinema, but I think at that point I had enough. But like recently I've gotten back into it because I've gotten back into comics in general. So Garfield has been with me my entire life. You can't see this, podcast listeners, but I am wearing orange today. I got into the spirit of Garfield.
Caroline, how about you? Like, I assume, Josh just mentioned, it was something, kind of one of the first books he remembers reading. Was that case for you too?
I don't remember reading the anthologies. I do remember I had, the little, like, Golden Book picture books that featured Garfield. One is Garfield the Fussy Cat, where he goes to, they need a cat for a cat food commercial, and so John takes Garfield, and he ends up, they're like, brilliant, we love him because they need a cat who can eat on command. And so Garfield shows off all of this, and then it doesn't end up the way that you think it's going to, in true Garfield style. But I know that we had that. We had some other ones. I remember seeing it in the newspaper and seeing the strips there. I think my main Garfield touchstone point is Garfield and Friends, the Saturday morning cartoon show. I remember, like, that's just what you watched on Saturday morning, whatever cartoons were playing, and that was definitely something that I watched regularly. I remember, like, whenever he would be eating lasagna, I would think, man, I wish I had some lasagna right now. So it was, difficult to watch because you really want that lasagna. But, funny. And, the merchandise, right? Like the toys, the suction cup. I didn't know they were called Stuck on You, but that type of thing. He was, there were Happy Meal promotions in the late 80s that tied in with Garfield toys and figures, and he's just been there. Yeah. Is it similar for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for me, I remember, my parents would, obviously get the newspaper every day growing up in Medicine Hat, and on Saturdays was the big color comics section that came with the newspaper, and I remember Garfield being in there, mostly too, like, from our school library. I would also borrow those, like, Garfield collections. And I remember, because I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, the very first Garfield collection is a red cover.
Yep.
And then obviously there's different colors for each future edition of the collection. And I remember, reading as a kid, it was like, reading that first one, because Garfield was like in his original form, he's bigger and everything just looks a lot different, and then like you get a couple collections later and then it's like, okay, this is the Garfield I'm most familiar with, so I like these ones more, just visually anyway. But I also remember too, the barber we'd go to also had like Garfield, the collection, the books and everything, so I liked going to get my hair cut because then I could read Garfield strips anyway. But also too, speaking of Garfield and Friends, that was a show too I remember my brothers and I used to always watch on Saturday mornings. And I remember, like, I don't know, not that long ago I saw an old episode, and it's like, it holds up. It's actually a really funny series. And the one thing that kind of bugged me as a kid, and I think I appreciate it more now, is I didn't like the U.S. Acres cartoons that were in it. So you would have Garfield, you'd have his animated short, and then it would cut to, Orson and the U.S. Acres crew on the farm. So if you look it up, you'll totally recognize them. There's like the pig and the lamb and
Orson. Yeah, let's give him his name.
Yeah,
and
right.
It was Bo Sheep.
Yes, that's right.
And his sister Lanolin.
Yeah,
which I did not get as a child.
But once again, go back and try and find some episodes, and they hold up. They're actually a really funny show. So, I mean, parents with young kids, if you want to watch something that won't drive you nuts, that would actually be a really good one to watch.
So we've talked about a few of the U.S. Acres people from the show, but aside from Garfield, do you have a favorite character in the Garfield verse? Josh.
So I have a few. One of them is going to be way back in time. You may not know this, but Odie originally had a different owner than John. That owner was Lyman in the original the comics from way back when. Disappeared entirely, but I did like Lyman because it was kind of like nice to have another human being there.
Yeah.
Just for John to speak to. But then eventually Garfield was the other human being for John to speak to. But my other favorite, my current one, I love the vet. I love Liz. Liz just makes me so happy, especially now that, spoiler alert, they're together, John and Liz. This is like a 20-year spoiler at this point. But, spoiler alert, they're together. And it's very cute. It's very nice that John had something go right in his life, because that poor man has had so much go wrong on dates and things. And Liz is just kind of a great addition to the comic, just being there permanently, and it's just also kind of fun. So yeah, definitely Liz and Lyman, despite him being disappeared. And as John Davis says, don't look in John Arbuckle's basement. That's actually said that for decades. Wow. Apparently, it was quite funny.
Now, is Liz the veterinarian?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll be honest, I did not know they were together now.
Oh yeah, no, I learned about that a few years ago because I stopped the comics before they got together.
Yeah.
And it's very cute now.
She's also part of a infamous Garfield comic strip, which I don't know if we'll get to, but it involves John being at the veterinarian's office and drinking something. So we probably can't talk about it, but I'll leave it at that. You can go Google it, but it's probably the most famous Garfield strip, for wrong reasons, though. So.
Oh, yeah. I vividly remember that strip. Yeah, definitely go look it up.
Yeah.
It'll give you a laugh.
Bryce, what about you? What characters stood out next to Garfield's spotlight?
Yeah, I mean, I always liked Odie. It felt bad for him because, Odie, of course, is this very sweet and lovable dog, the eyes wide open, and he just wants to be friends with Garfield, and Garfield will do everything he can to just boot him off the counter. You can't help but feel sorry for Odie, but he's so lovable. Actually, not that it helps here, but I do have like a Funko of both Garfield and Odie in the room I'm in right now. So, but nobody listening can see them. And then also too, and I apologize if I'm stealing your pick here, Caroline. I have a feeling I might be, but you can't help but love Grandma Arbuckle. Now, Grandma Arbuckle does appear in the actual comic strip, but she, like, for most people probably will recognize her or know her from the Garfield Christmas special, where she is this, like, no-nonsense rocking granny, and definitely is, like, the coolest member of the Arbuckle family for sure. And also, too, you know what? I like John. He's a lovable dork, and I personally am happy to hear that from you, Josh, that he is now in a relationship. Good for John.
Yeah. I did have Grandma Arbuckle. Is that her name, or did she have a last name?
Before we recorded, I did go to Garfield Wiki, which is an actual site, and because I wanted to have her name correct, and yes, they confirmed that they have her name as Grandma Arbuckle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Particularly because of A Garfield Christmas. In that the plot, roughly, is that John, Garfield, and Odie go out to John's family's farm and spend Christmas with his parents, his brother, and his grandmother. And it's just them celebrating Christmas, really. And like, there's a plot about the grandmother, she's missing her late husband, and Garfield ends up finding something that he shares with her and brings her some comfort, and it's quite nice, actually. It's a musical, like, it has songs in it, and they're also quite catchy. So yeah.
Let's not forget, too, in that Christmas special, of the awesome gift that Odie makes for Garfield. Like, it's incredible. The little back scratcher using the little hoe there. It's perfect.
Yeah. I really like it. I think everyone is just bringing their A game in A Garfield Christmas. I also with Odie, I also have him on my list because it is kind of, you do kind of feel for him. A lot of the reviews or overviews of Garfield that I consulted in my preparation for this episode have talked about how Garfield has gotten less mean, less cynical over the 45-year time, and he's still, I think, kind of seen as kind of like grouchy or prickly or sarcastic in some ways, but he does a lot less kicking Odie off the table these days, which is good. Happy for John, happy for Odie. But then I was thinking, like, where we see it, because I guess Jim Davis has been asked a lot about why can't Odie speak? You know, because you can have other animals speaking or other cats, and the answer is that, well, Garfield doesn't understand dog. Odie is speaking, Garfield just doesn't understand him. And that, like, blew my mind because then it's like, okay, so the whole, like, I guess I want to take a course in, like, media literacy now, because I had been reading it like it was just presented and we were just looking at it, but I think I need to go reinterpret the last 45 years through a specific Garfield lens. Like, he's not just the main character, he's also the lens for everything. And I don't know that I had thought of it that way. So, yeah.
Do a whole paper on the psychology of the Garfield comic strip.
Well, and on that note, another character I am fascinated by is Nermal.
I was going to bring Nermal up as well, yeah.
Yeah. And even just the depiction of Nermal, and how I was mainly introduced to the character through the TV show, where the kitten, the Nermal, the world's cutest kitten, is voiced by a female voice artist, and is drawn in the depiction of Nermal has many female coded qualities, like the idea of there's a default male animated character, and then the female is the same but with like eyelashes.
Yeah.
And like watching that, I was like, oh, okay, Nermal is a female kitten, in the strip male. And so it's like, what is Nermal like presenting in a certain way? Like how is this all coming together? Does it matter? Is it like where it? I just is fascinated by it.
And maybe too, because Garfield's so mean to Nermal, maybe that was something where it's like it's not as bad if it's like, you know, Garfield picking on, you know, another boy cat versus, or another male cat versus a female one. Who knows? Who knows?
And but you know, thinking of how characters are presented, and then just Nermal's total love of themselves, like that confidence that Nermal brings to every situation. Yeah.
And where's Garfield always trying to ship him off to? Is it like Abu Dhabi or something like that?
Yeah.
Poor Nermal.
Yeah. So lots of different characters.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I just want to kind of go back a little bit, Caroline. You touched on Garfield being like not as mean now as he was before. I remember years ago reading the biography of Peanuts creator Charles Schulz, and in that he talks about like different comic strips and everything, and or like the biographer talks about different comic strips that he read, and he of course was naturally very protective of the Peanuts brand, but you know, in the 80s, you know, 70s, and more so in the 80s, where we had Garfield, of course, having this huge impact on the daily newspaper comic strip. Peanuts was always there, but, you know, Garfield probably was more popular in the 80s than Peanuts were. But Charles Schulz hated Garfield. He thought that he didn't like the way it was drawn. He didn't like that Garfield was, mostly he didn't like it because Garfield he felt was a very mean character, and he wasn't very nice to the other characters on there, which is kind of funny because I love Peanuts, but man, those kids were jerks to Charlie Brown too. So it kind of went both ways.
This makes it even funnier. There was a TV special in 1980 that I believe was called Fantastic Funnies, and it was hosted by Lonnie Anderson, and it's like she's live action until she's then turned into a comic, and it's like saluting the history of the funnies. And Garfield is introduced as the new kind of character because this is, you know, 80. Its strip went nationwide in 1978, and she's introducing all of like the iconic strip characters from the last few decades, and then she gets to the animals, and it's like Snoopy and Marmaduke and different dogs, and then introducing Garfield, and the dogs try to like growl at Garfield, and he just hisses in a way that you would not see modern Garfield do at all. Like, he is aggressive in this thing, but that makes it even funnier that he's like turning on Snoopy and in that moment.
Yeah. I'm sure probably Charles Schulz was not cool with that at all. I can almost guarantee
I didn't sign off on this.
Yeah, guaranteed. Yeah. You know, Garfield's really taken on a life outside of the comics. You know, Caroline, you mentioned the suction cup Garfield that, you know, clings to car windows, and really Garfield really is a true pop culture figure. You know, besides the comic strips, Josh, do you have any other favorite Garfield pop culture moments?
I do actually. Going back to the specials real quick, my first Garfield special was Garfield Goes to Hollywood, which was Garfield and Odie appearing on a talent show, I believe. I haven't seen that one in years, but I think you can watch all the specials on YouTube now, which is fantastic. I also remember the Garfield Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade float. That was pretty cool. And as well, very recently, he's actually in a fighting game, Nickelodeon All Stars Brawl, which is really funny to think about when you think about like Garfield going into combat.
I think they also have like a kart racing game too.
Yes,
where you can, it's like Mario Kart but with Nickelodeon characters or something.
Yeah, they actually have two, and it's I think it's basically the same one again but with multiplayer, which is really funny. And I've seen a number of Let's Plays on YouTube featuring the Garfield kart, and it's definitely a video game that you can play and purchase for a reasonable price. And that's what I'm going to end that one on. But Garfield's been in video games for years and years. I believe there was actually, going back to the Ghostbusters thing that we had talked about earlier, there was a Ghostbusters Labyrinth game for the GBA, and I can't remember which region it was in, but it was in one region it was called Garfield's Labyrinth. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
So again, multiple connections back and forth between the two.
Interesting. Yeah. Caroline, how about you?
I have a couple, and I think they're also yours. So
that's okay. I stole your Grandma Arbuckle favorite character one, so go ahead and scoop me here.
Garfield minus Garfield is mine. I think this what I associate it with like an early internet thing, but I guess it's like about 10, 15 years now.
Yeah, I think it started in 2005, I want to say.
Yeah, which is not early internet, but early whatever this era has been.
Yeah.
So for this, what the person did was take away Garfield's speech bubbles originally, and then like just erasing it, because in the comic strips, John is often saying things, and sometimes it seems like he can interact with Garfield. Sometimes, you know, it's not. Apparently, I guess canonically, John cannot hear what Garfield is thinking, which makes sense. But Garfield can understand what John is saying. But John doesn't know that. So the idea is that he's saying all these things into a void. And when you don't have Garfield coming back with an answer or a punchline, it casts a sadness, a darkness over it that was quite interesting. And I think that people's willingness to accept that on the character of John speaks to how he had been formed over the years.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just looking at the Tumblr account, really, where it started is still up. And I was looking at it earlier today before we recorded. And the one, it just cracked me up. It's like, of course, the 3 panels for a normal strip. And the first one, it just shows John. He's not saying anything. He's just like looking to the left. The second panel is like him screaming, like his hair is going everywhere. And then the third panel is just him looking normal again to the left, like he was in the first panel. And it just, like, when you look at it on its own, it just looks absolutely insane. So, the whole idea of Garfield minus Garfield is genius. And the one thing I do find really cool about it is, like, Jim Davis, unlike a lot of other kind of creators of different franchises or whatever, he's really like, he's all in on Garfield minus Garfield.
Yeah, and they actually released a book of the Garfield comic strips with Garfield removed from them, and the Garfield minus Garfield guy did the foreword for that and talked about it. I think, Jim Davis in a lot of ways seems like he's pretty into the idea of Garfield kind of like existing in the world now, and people doing all these different creative things. I read one article that talked about how when he started out in cartooning, it was more exclusive. You had the only way to do it was to get published in a paper and then syndicated, and that limited the number of people. And now he says anyone can, go on the internet and post your work, and your mom reads it, and it's like, hi mom, who's listening to this podcast right now, my mom. You're a cartoonist, right? And he goes on to say, and that's wonderful, because some of these are really great. So that just kind of embracing that change in it was something I came across consistently in the research of Jim Davis.
Yeah, and like there was years ago, I think he did a Ask Me Anything on Reddit, and a lot of people were like trying to poke fun at Garfield and say like, how is Garfield alive? I think it might have been on the 40th anniversary, actually. It wasn't that long ago. But you know, making fun of Garfield eating lasagna and just being big in general. And like, you tell Jim Davis was, you go back and read it, like he's still having fun with the answers and everything. So, you know, he doesn't take it too seriously, and which is good. And I think that's kind of why it's kind of endured for all of these years too.
Yeah, so Bryce, I'm going to leave my other one for you to share. It's one of my favorite things.
I want to go back a little bit because, you know, Caroline, you talked about the Garfield kind of suction cup things.
Yep.
So one of the other really iconic items in the 80s featuring Garfield was the Garfield telephone. So it was just like an actual 3D version of Garfield, and if you picked up the phone, it was kind of like his back and butt kind of was like the receiver. And when you picked it up, his eyes would open. But when you weren't using the phone, of course, Garfield's sleeping all the time, and you couldn't see his eyes. So those phones were everywhere in the 80s. It's still to this day a huge pop culture collector's item. Now, fast forward to the year 2019. We're in France, and there's a beach there. And for some reason, all of these kind of washed up Garfield phones from all these Garfield phones from the 80s end up being washed up on this beach in France. And there's like pieces of them and everything, and they're kind of destroyed, and everybody's like, what's going on? Where are all these Garfield phones coming from? And it turns out there was a missing shipping container. I don't know how old the shipping container was, if it has all these 1980s Garfield phones on them, but it got like lost somewhere at sea, like it was opened, and now all these like old Garfield phones are washing up on this beach. So yeah, that happened I think in 2019. Caroline, I'm sure you may have more information on it than I do, though.
No, just that the shipping container, they didn't immediately know where they were coming from. The mystery went on for several years, and the shipping container is still there. It's apparently lodged in such a way as to be unretrievable, and so most of the Garfields have already dispersed. Some of them are still in the container, but the ones that have already escaped, there could be Garfields continuing to wash up on this beach for years to come. And the photos are haunting. Oh, yeah. It's wild, and whether you look at it from an environmental issue, because the people in this area in France have been, you know, concerned about the plastic and the pollution of these things, because they're not going to decompose in a lifetime. But there's something hauntingly beautiful about it that I just really enjoy. I mentioned earlier that there is going to be a new movie coming out. Bryce, you mentioned the internet's probably going to have some opinions on it, but there's no signs of Garfield slowing down. It's still published daily. I went and I looked at today's Garfield comic so that I, felt like I should. Why do you think Garfield has endured all of these years, Josh?
So, as I think about other comics that I've read, other long runners, which have gone over for 20 years, like we think about comics like For Better or For Worse and Kathy, and comics like that have all ended, but Garfield's still going on, I think it's because Garfield hits on a timeless aspect that a lot of comics don't seem to. Like, comics either stay in one place or they kind of move on. Garfield is just kind of in this nebulous area where, like, things do advance, but it's not enough for the comic to ever feel dated in a way. Like, we don't, like, sometimes you'll see, like, the TV is a little weird because you have to go up and turn the knob, but that's not really enough to date it so badly that it can't be enjoyed by everybody. And I think that's one of the keys. Like, anybody can go into the old Garfield comics and pick up an old comic and read it and be like, oh, this is funny. And I keep going. And I think that's what really helps out. And things like Garfield minus Garfield and things like that. Moments that continue to put Garfield into the zeitgeist of modern minds, like Garfield minus Garfield. There's I won't mention the name, but there's a particular thing on Reddit where Garfield is imagined in a whole new light, and I will leave it at that. If you know, you know. If you don't look it up. But
I want to talk off air once we're done recording here, because this has piqued my interest.
Oh, well, we're going to have some fun. But it's things like that keep Garfield in the minds of people, to go back and look at Garfield and see, like, oh, maybe it's still good, or, I've never heard of Garfield, so I'm going to go take a look and see what's going on. And of course, with the specials now being on YouTube for free, anybody can watch a Garfield special quite easily and be reminded of their childhood or show it to a new generation. It's just wonderful.
For the anthologies to still be in print as well, like a number of them are, and many of them are, and kids, one of the reasons I felt emboldened to bring the topic of Garfield to the Overdue Finds pitch meeting was because I know how popular it is in the library. We see kids all the time. I bet if I looked right now, I'm looking out into the workroom, right, I bet there's a Garfield on our recently returned truck, because it is just constant. Like in the 15 years that I've been working at the library, I don't think I've seen hardly any other and Garfield not just for children, but the comic strip books have consistently stayed at that level of popularity. And I think you're right in the timelessness. It's always kind of feels like the present in a way that some other comics don't. I think I haven't kept up with the Family Circus either, but I would have a hard time believing that the Family Circus was taking place in modern day, whereas Garfield, it could be any time from 1978 to now, and it kind of has the same feeling. Jim Davis has talked about how he tries to keep things not political. Like, it's very general in the comics. It doesn't have a lot of modern references to things. And he described the way he goes to work on particularly that weekend, the one that's bigger and in color, and he describes it as having a visual gag for the kids and a wordplay for the adults. And that just summed it up for me. Like, that's going to speak to such a wide audience and stay relevant for it going forward. And I think just in general, the core concepts of who Garfield is, eating, sleeping, and putting up with the people you live with, that's universal.
We all love to be lazy. Like, let's face it, right?
Yeah. We all have had a case of the Mondays. So we're going to move into our roundtable questions. Garfield, of course, is also the last name of former U.S. President James A. Garfield, who was the 20th U.S. President and served from March 1881 until his assassination in September 1881. I guess I was also going to do some President Garfield fun facts on the show today. So Jim Davis's grandfather was named James Garfield Davis after the president, and then he took so Garfield's actually named after his grandfather, but the grandfather's named after the president. Still counts in my mind. Anyway, what other last name of a president do you think would make a good name for a cat, Josh?
Oh, for a good name for a cat. I'll be honest, I've always the name Taft always sticks in my mind when I think about U.S. presidents.
Yeah.
I would name a cat Taft. I don't know if it's a good name, but I would name a cat Taft. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I also strongly considered Taft. So, yeah. Bryce.
I love, like, old man names for pets, like something like, somebody who was born, like a name that somebody who was born in the 1930s would have. Like, I love those names when I see, like, a dog named Jasper or something like that. So mine, I went with Chester after the 21st president, Chester A. Arthur.
Nice.
That'd be a great cat name.
Yeah. I went with Jefferson because I love human names for pets.
Oh,
and
yeah.
the idea of calling like a cat Jeff is very funny to me. And then when you're mad and then be like Jefferson and then have that escalation possible. So I think that would be good.
I saw online not that long ago, somebody had their dog and their dog's name was Kevin, which cracked me up. Like, just the idea of a dog, just like I said, a dog or a cat or any animal having like a person name is always funny.
Yeah. Second roundtable question. Garfield famously hates Mondays, but we're going to put a more positive spin on things. What is your favorite day of the week? Josh.
Oh, that is a tricky one, because all days are good to me, but I have to say Fridays, because me and Caroline, we're both fans of it. We love Drag Race, and that comes out on Fridays. I'm very excited to get into the new season, so Fridays for me.
I will say that Friday is also my answer. I agree. I think, Loverboy said everybody's working for the weekend. Rebecca Black, Friday, gotta get down on Friday. There's so much possibility, right? You're just on the cusp of a weekend, and even if you're working, we do shift work here at the library, so we might be here, but we're still excited about it. So Friday is my answer.
I went with something a little bit different. Friday was in the running for me, but I'm still working on Friday. Nothing against, I love my job and everything, but I'm still working on Friday. So naturally, I went with Saturday as my pick. Saturdays just feel a little bit different when you wake up. There's sometimes I'll wake up on a Saturday and be like, oh, I hope I didn't sleep in. And then it's like, wait, I don't work today. So, and I mean, I'm very lucky. I work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. I'm very spoiled that way. So for me, Saturday, it's the start of the official start of the weekend. But Fridays are very close, though, because my friends and I also, Friday nights, we do not watch Drag Race, but we will go online and play Call of Duty together on Friday nights. So Friday is also very fun, too.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Josh. Is there anything coming up at EPL that you would like our listeners to know about?
Well, thank you, Caroline. Yes, actually, the YRCA winners have just been announced as of the recording. Very exciting. Go to epl.ca/YRCA to see who won. Hopefully your picks did. And I know from secret information that we're getting the new ones in as I speak. So check out your local branch to see what's new on the YRCA shelf, and hopefully you'll find a new favorite.
We hope you've enjoyed today's show. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you get all of our new episodes. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and most importantly, tell a friend about the show.
Yeah, and don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in today's show notes. I don't think we're going to link to all 117 ebook versions of Garfield that we have in our collection, but we'll still have a pretty good Garfield list that you can check out. So, and as Caroline mentioned, we love to hear from our listeners, and you can email us at podcast@epl.ca. Both Caroline and myself get those emails, and we love hearing from our listeners. And you can also share your thoughts about the show with us on Twitter at epl.ca and by using the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.